Hi everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's the middle of the growing season over here in Australia and things are growing like crazy. So I thought it's time to give you an updated houseplant tour. Let's go! Right, thanks for tuning in again. It hasn't been so long that I gave you a full update on my houseplant tour, but as I said, things are growing like crazy at the moment. It is spring going into summer. We've got beautiful warm temperatures, lots of sunlight hours, and still high humidity. So the plants are really loving it at the moment. This time I want to start in my bedroom and really just look at those plants, and then we're going to move into the living area in a sec. Before we look at some of these plants, just wanted to give you a quick recap on the room in itself. So this is quite a small room. It is my bedroom and I have my wall of poles over here. There's an east-north facing window right behind you, and I get beautiful morning sun coming through over here. The sun moves away around about midday, so for the second half of the day, it's not really the brightest room. So I do have two grow lights over here. I love the nice sleek look of them. They are from a company called Mother, and I have a full video just talking about light, including grow lights. I do also have a discount code for them, so I will link the light video at the end screen later on if you're interested in that. Apart from that, I also have a Dyson fan over here. That fan is also a heater in winter, but during summer, I just use it to make sure there's always airflow in this room. But for the sake of today, I'm actually going to park this on the floor just so you can see me a little bit better. The only other thing I really do is open and close the window. So for example, if the sun hits the room in the morning, it heats up the room really, really quickly. Hot air can absorb more water, so the relative humidity in that room is actually going down as soon as the sun hits the room. Then during the afternoon and at nighttime, when there's no direct sun and the room cools down a little bit more, the air can absorb less water, meaning that the relative humidity is higher. So I pretty much try and keep my window closed as long as the sun is hitting the room in itself, and then as soon as the sun moves away after midday, then I have my window open for the rest of the day to always make sure there's fresh air and airflow, and obviously the Dyson fan helps out with the airflow as well. All right, so let's talk about the plants. I call this my wall of poles because, well, it's a wall full of poles. And predominantly I like velvet philodendron in here because the room is much smaller and I can control the environment a little bit better just by opening and closing the window. It is actually more humid in here than it would be in the living area because I have many windows that are always open in there. So in here, the humidity stays a little bit higher because of the size of the room, which is perfect for my velvet philodendron. They all like a little bit more humidity, specifically my all-time favorite Philodendron verrucosum. So let's have a look at it because there are some exciting updates to share with you. There's two plants on here. The top shoot just pushed out a new leaf, and I mean, have a look at the back and these furry petioles as well. Super beautiful. And there is a brand new leaf unfurling right over here as well that is going to be absolutely massive. So happy days. Right next to it, we've got Philodendron sodyroi. It's definitely maturing quite nicely. I did a plant spotlight on this and I mentioned that it's a really slow climber. So it's only really about a third up its moss pole. But what I have noticed is that as it matures and starts growing larger leaves, the silver pattern seems to be going away. So if we compare that to one of the older leaves down here, for example, you can see that the more juvenile leaves have a lot more silver splotches, however you want to call it. And then as it matures, the silver unfortunately goes away. So I'm not actually super fond of that. So we'll see what I do with it. I might actually cut it back and try and grow it more juvenile to keep the silver, but we'll find out. Another beautiful new leaf over here is on my Splendid. So Splendid is a hybrid of verrucosum and melanochrysum. And the verrucosum heritage really comes through with these beautiful red backs and that veining, right? So, I mean, that is beautiful. And then the Melano parentage comes through, giving it these really nice, dark, long leaves. Beautiful. What else do we have? Down here, we've just got a few seedlings over here. So these are all seedlings I have grown from seed. And these ones in particular, they're actually my own seeds. So I made these by pollinating this plant with itself. So this is my crystallinum anthurium, also pushing out a new leaf, and yeah, I pollinated that, and I also recorded that whole process in case you're interested. Right behind it, we've got my Mandula pothos. So it's been on a moss pole for maybe about a year, and if we come a bit closer, we can see that at the beginning, when I first popped it on the moss pole, it had these normal sized leaves. That's kind of how we all know our Mandula. But then as it climbs up the moss pole, despite the fact that it is super, super light, so a lot of white variegation in here, it has sized up really decently. So yeah, I'm excited about this one. And I think it's just so nice having all of these different shades of white, green, and almost like mint in between. But obviously the white part can't actually contribute to photosynthesis, so the white part isn't really desirable for the plant. But it obviously looks nice. I like it. And yeah, when they push out a new leaf, they're really suffering a little bit. Like, I mean, this looks torturous, but it's going to be just fine. All right, and then right next to it, and I think you guys need to back up a little bit because these leaves are so large, it's going to be hard to fit them all in a frame. This is my Philodendron glorious. It's a hybrid of melanochrysum, which is right next to it, and Philodendron gloriosum, which is a crawling velvet philodendron. This plant honestly just has the easiest time sizing up. So yeah, this is definitely one of my favorites. So as I mentioned, I have my Milano over here, and it's finally sizing up quite nicely. But again, it reached the top of its moss pole, so I'm going to have to work on a chop and extend soon. We're just going to set it back in size a little bit. But I'm very excited about finally getting some decent size on these Milano leaves. I skipped this one. This one is actually a majestic. I cut it right back. So a few months ago, it was getting way too big, so I cut it right back because it was just taking up too much space, and that's the first new leaf it has given me after the chop. So I think it suffered a little bit because obviously that caterpillar was already there by the time I chopped it, and then it just didn't have enough support to actually fully develop. So we'll see if this will ever kind of inflate properly or if this is going to stay a little bit messed up. But the leaf thereafter should be all good now that it's recovered. I will also do a full video on this whole chop back, but I want to wait until it actually has grown back and gotten back to a desirable state before I show you the full process. And then last one over here, we've got my Philodendron gigas or gigas, also with a new leaf. It's pushing out a new leaf every couple of weeks, or every 3 weeks at the moment. It is closest to the window, so it gets the most light, and it really throws out these beautiful red leaves. And compared to the Milano, right next to each other, you can really see that the Milano is much more elongated and has these nice slopes, whereas the gigas is more like tear-shaped. All right, just a couple more before we can move on. I've got my blood banana over here. So that's a Musa acuminata zebrina. Yeah, happy days. I'm still struggling with it a little bit. I feel like sometimes it gets a little bit too much sun, and then it goes really sad. Then it recovers really quickly again. I suppose I don't want to put too much stress on it, but I do want to give a bright light. So not sure if I'm happy with this spot where it is right now, but it's a constant trial and error. And then right next to it, we've got one of my favorites at the moment, Philodendron plowmanii. I believe it's a narrow form. And I think you can tell why this is one of my favorites at the moment. I think these leaves are just really pretty, has a little bit of silver, has a little bit of black in the veining as well. So it really gives it texture and dimension. And on the back, if you want to zoom in a little bit on this, you can see that it has really nice ruffled petioles as well. So very special, very interesting. Yeah. And oh, I think this is already giving me an inflow. Look at this. I think this would be a little inflow coming out, which is crazy. It's only grown 4 or 5 leaves, and it started off being really small. So this is maturing really quickly, really nicely, and I'm giving it a lot of light. I was actually surprised at how much light it can take. All right, I think I covered everything in here, so let's go into the living area and look at more plants. Let's go. Alrighty, we're in the living area, so just a quick recap on the living area as well. You're currently standing on my balcony. I have a large northeast facing window from pretty much floor to ceiling over here, so I get a lot of light in this part of the living area. You can probably see that there's a little bit more light coming in from back there. There's also a northeast facing window over here, so same exposure as the living room. So over there I get the sun rise in the morning, and over here I pretty much get the afternoon sun during summer, and during winter I also get the sunset. So pretty much the best exposure. Keep in mind I am in the southern hemisphere, so north is the equivalent of south if you're in the northern hemisphere, if that makes sense. As I mentioned briefly earlier, I do nothing to control the humidity or temperature or anything in here. Of course, during winter when it gets cold, I use a heater, but that's for my own sake, not necessarily for the plants. I don't want to be freezing in my own apartment. So they're really just relying on the natural conditions, humidity, temperature, and light levels, apart from the IKEA cabinet that has a little grow light in it. So in my bedroom, I had my velvet philos because they appreciate a more controlled environment. Well, I don't control it, but because the room is smaller, there's just less fluctuations, there's just less ups and downs, and it is a little bit easier to control humidity and temperature in the room purely by opening and closing a window. In the living area, that's not really possible. Also, I have an open kitchen, so whenever I cook and so on, I just have to have my windows open pretty much at all times, which means that this room is usually a little drier if I compare it to the bedroom. Because of the lower humidity, I chose plants like Monsteras and pothos to be in here, but as the plants grow up, more and more plants start moving from my bedroom into the living area, so I'm just kind of testing out a few Philodendron and how they do over here, and so far, they're doing great. All right, I hope that gives you a really quick overview on the growing conditions, the light levels that I got to work with over here, but really the purpose of today's video is just show and tell. I want to show you some beautiful leaves. So let's just maybe get started with this monster over here. This is, I don't know, I keep tossing up. I don't know if this is my favorite plant or if the verrucosum is my favorite plant. They're definitely both up there. This is Monstera adansonii, subspecies laniata, and I've grown this plant from a 4-node unrooted cutting. It was just a long vine with small leaves, maybe this size, that I got from a friend. So this is really close to my heart because I did pretty much all of the plants. I always start them when they're small, but I specifically like this one because it is such a common plant. Everybody knows adansonii, but not many people know that when you let it climb up a moss pole, that you can actually grow it quite large. Now, they can grow even larger. This is the 3rd or 4th time I've done a chop and extend with this plant. And with every chop and extend, obviously, it has a little bit of a setback. So chop and extend, in case you're not familiar, I basically, once the plant reaches the top, I chop it in half, I take the top half, I pot it back up. So that bottom part on the pole over here was the top half of the pole in April. So when this was the top half, it started growing really nice large leaves. I then chopped it, potted it up, and after the repot, it obviously had to focus its energy on growing a root system first. So it started giving me smaller leaves after the chop, but it has recovered really quickly and has now given me larger leaves than ever. So by the time it reaches the top, I reckon these leaves can get a little bit larger even, but then it's time for another chop and extend, and then it will have a little bit of a setback again. Ideally, I wouldn't have to chop and extend it, but ceilings. All right, so I do that chop and extend with all of my plants, by the way. So yeah, not just this one, but I use this one as an example to kind of explain to you how I managed to grow them quite large within an indoor setting while keeping them quite manageable in size. This plant has rooted like crazy. Let me just pick up the pot for you and you can see how many roots. So basically what happens is when I water this plant, some excess water is just dripping from the moss pole through the pot into the planter, which creates a really nice humid environment within the pot, which attracts roots. So it's almost like I'm giving this a hydroponic setup without really having tried. Obviously not ideal. In a perfect world, I would actually give it more room to grow, more substrate down there, but yeah, I'm limited in space, and that 25 centimeter pot is pretty much the largest I want to give it. Plus, soon I'll have to chop it, and then it has to re-establish a root system anyway. So all of the roots down there have only grown over the last 6 months after I chopped it. A little bit hard to get to, but this is my Philodendron atabapoense. It's growing these super, super nice elongated leaves with these cute little bunny ears at the top. This is a new leaf coming out right now. It has beautiful red backs. And what I've done with this plant is when it went through its chop and extend, I took the top part and I potted it up right next to the bottom part of the previous pole. So this one was the bottom part, this one was the top part, and then I re-extended the top part. So the bottom part has given me 2 new shoots, one here and one here. And now I'm just waiting for both of them to start climbing up that moss pole as well. So eventually I have 3 plants climbing up the same moss pole without really having to propagate it. It's just a byproduct of the chop and extend method. All right, what else do I have over here? This one is my Monstera pinnatipartita, and I've had the hardest time getting this to mature. And I feel like if you're looking at it now, you can really see a gradual increase in leaf size. It has had a lot of spider mites, and you can see some spider mite damage on here, which probably has set it back a little bit. You can see these little yellow dots. That's where the spider mites have sucked on it. But it is increasing in fenestrations. It's increasing in leaf size. It definitely has a bit too much internodal spacing. Looking at photos of this plant online, I know that usually the internodal spacing would be a little bit shorter. So I don't think this is getting as much light as it probably would appreciate, but well, I'm growing it indoors. If this was in a greenhouse, it would probably have a much easier time maturing, but this is kind of as much light as I can currently give it. I have so many plants, I do need to prioritize. And unfortunately, that pinnatipartita just does not take the cake. So yeah, it's not going to get the prime spot. On my right over here, those are kind of like the juvenile moss poles at the moment, right? I mean, most of the plants that are really large that you see that I do plant spotlights on, they're usually between 2 and 3 years old. But of course, you know, I've gotten some new plants over the last 2 and 3 years, and they just need a little bit more time to actually mature. So they're here. They're not looking that impressive, but you know, that's part of the hobby. Like, they got to start small. I love starting my poles with small cuttings or small plants, and then really growing them to maturity myself in my environment. That's really the whole fun for me. So yeah, not everything I have is huge. Like, there's one element that is preventing that, and that is just time. So hopefully in 2 years' time, those will be as impressive as some of these other plants that have already had for 2 to 3 years. So next to it is my Monstera siltepecana El Salvador, and I'm really, really happy with it because it's finally giving me consistent fenestrations. So that has been 3 years in the making, but I'm excited. And one more I want to point out over here is Philodendron ernestii. I think it is one of the most underrated philodendron. I don't hear much about it. I don't see it much out there. So, and I'm not quite sure why, because it actually sizes up really, really quickly, and it grows these beautiful leaves that just add a little bit of texture and shape to the collection. So I really love it. And if we're looking at this a little bit closer, actually, this plant has not yet gone through a chop and extend. So this has matured just growing up that one moss pole over here. So if you look at the bottom, you can see these small leaves down there. This is what it started with. And then it really started changing in shape and size as it matures. And one more thing, it also has these beautiful ruffled petioles. So I don't know, I think this is a pretty cool plant, and I'm not quite sure why I don't hear and see it more often on the internet. I don't know. All right, this is my Alocasia cuprea. It hasn't really done much since the last time I spoke about it, so I mean, it's still looking beautiful, but I don't think there's much I want to mention right now. But let's have a little look into the IKEA cabinet. All right, let me show you that not everything goes smoothly over here. This is my newest queen leaf, and Well, something happened to the bottom part. As it was unfurling, it was actually getting stuck in the grid at the back, and then it kind of just snapped itself off. So yeah, this could have been a really beautiful leaf. Now it's going to be a really beautiful half of a leaf, but that's okay. Like, honestly, it's just a leaf. They'll come and go. That's the plant's job, is to produce more leaves. So I just need to be patient. There will be a new one in a couple of months' time, or like maybe just a month or so, given it's spring at the moment. So really, don't stress about the leaves. You can stress if the root system is unhealthy, because then you'll never get a new leaf. So yeah, these things don't bother me at all. Another one I want to point out is this one. So this is actually a variegated anthurium, and I grew this from seed. And I didn't know it was going to be variegated. It was just a random variegation. Now, it grew too large for the IKEA cabinet, so I had to move it out of the cabinet. I moved it into my bedroom, and honestly, I don't know what happened, but it had rot, but not root rot. It had stem rot. It rotted actually from the top down rather from the bottom up. So that was really weird. So I had to just chop off the top. You can see that it ended up just being a little stump. And since then, it has grown these two little shoots, and both shoots continue having the variegation. So that's exciting. But yeah, again, showing you that not everything goes smoothly all the time. Plants do die, or like it didn't die. I just needed to rescue it a little bit. Maybe one more. This one was one of the first anthuriums I've ever grown from seed. So I'm really happy with this one and how it's getting some decent size. So I think it's just a magnificum hybrid, and it has these wavy edges, kind of, you know, it's not super flat. It has a little bit of shape to it. All right, let's close this back up. Alrighty, another one I might want to point out. A couple of months ago, I uploaded a video about this Epipremnum pinnatum variegata, because it had rot. So essentially the whole pot, everything that was in that pot was just rot, and the rot even climbed up the stem. So the plant was just hovering on that moss pole. It wasn't actually rooted into the pot. So a couple of months ago, I chopped it, I potted the healthy part of the pole back into a pot, and since then, it has grown so many roots already, right? So this plant purely survived based on the roots in the moss pole, and then once I potted up the moss pole, the roots from the moss pole expanded back into the pot. It survived for over 3 months without having any roots in the pot in itself. Just survived based on the roots in the moss pole. Now, of course, that's not the ideal condition for it. Ideally, it would have the more roots, the better. So you can definitely see that this was like the leaves when it was still really healthy, and then eventually the root rot kicked in, and then I got an empty node, so no leaf at all over here. And then after that, it is having a bit of a hard time. I mean, you can see this leaf is kind of very deformed. Then this leaf down here was also a little bit deformed, and now it's finally gone back to normal, right? So I'm assuming that the deformed leaf was just as a result of the shock, but looks like it has now fully recovered, and judging the root system, this plant should now have plenty of roots to continue growing like nothing ever happened. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the best variegation, but it's probably a blessing in disguise, because if this would have a lot of variegation, then it would be the plant would struggle even more. Also want to point out this Cebu Blue. To be honest, I don't even know exactly if it is actually, it's definitely some form of Epipremnum pinnatum. When it was younger, it had more silver in it. As it matures, it's getting more green. Well, you guys know how I feel about names. They're just names. I like the plant for what it looks like, not for what it's called. I'll keep calling it my Epipremnum pinnatum. And this only had a chop and extend a couple of weeks ago, and it's already growing new leaves. So this was the first leaf after the chop and extend. So this one really didn't suffer at all from the chop. It keeps growing. All right, over here we've got my Oxalis. So this make quite the rounds on the internet. And as always, if you make the rounds on the internet, there's a lot of people with a lot of opinions. I was told so many times that I am extremely rude and unethical by giving my plant a shake. So I just did it again. Honestly, guys, it's a plant. It's not a baby. I can totally shake it. And if anything, I've been shaking my plants for years now, and they don't look too unhealthy. So I'm not too sure what everybody's concern is. Alrighty, I think this is the last one, and then I'm going to wrap it up. But I don't think we can go through a plant tour without this leaf over here. This is my Alocasia Jacqueline. And this is only its second leaf in my care that it has given me. And if you can come close, I hope the camera can pick this up, but it has this beautiful little hair, so it has a really interesting texture. But what that also means is that it absolutely attracts spider mites. It's so beautiful, I think it's worth fighting the spider mites for. And if you look at the back as well, it has really nice dark purple blackish veins almost. So I think that's my favorite leaf of the month, or like the favorite leaf at the moment. That's going to be hard to beat. Thanks for joining me for my updated apartment tour. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did like this video, I reckon you will love this tour I filmed at Growing Grounds Greenhouse. Thank you so much. Take care, like, subscribe, and leave a nice comment. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Bye.